Hey everyone, and welcome to a brand new video. Tonight we have 2 hours of stories. I hope you all enjoy them. If you do, please be sure to drop a like rating. Let's see if we can reach 600 likes on this one. Of course, only if you feel that this video is deserving of it. Also, I am testing out a new microphone at the moment. If you've been watching this channel for a while, I usually update my microphone every year or two, just trying to find the perfect one for this channel. Started out with an AT2020 and then eventually got an NT1, then it was the ZDM1, then it was my RE20, and then a couple years ago I got my Ethos. And I thought that was going to be my quote unquote forever mic. But I recently got a really good deal on a E100SX, so I'm giving this one a shot. Honestly, I think I like my voice more on this one than any previous mic. But yeah, just mentioning because it is audio content and I take a pretty large interest in microphones and stuff. Maybe big shocker. I was sick while recording this video. I'm feeling a lot better now. Just really excited to be back in the groove of things and creating some content. Anyways, sit back, do whatever it is that you do to relax, and as always, I hope you all have a great night. A couple of years ago, I went on vacation with a couple friends of mine. My friend Kelly came from a place called Chatterblinds up in New England. Well, her family had long since moved out. They kept a summer home in the area. Small town living in a place down by the coast? Sign me up. There were 4 of us in total. Kelly, who arranged the whole thing, was a work friend of mine. Then there was Mary. I didn't know her very well, but she and Kelly went way back. To the point where they could probably finish each other's sentences. Finally, there was Annie. I don't know her all that well, but I'd seen her around the office a couple of times. Apparently she was related to Mary somehow, but I hadn't bothered to ask how. So on a late Thursday afternoon, we headed to a New England Labor Day weekend. Chatterblinds is a peculiar town, just past Brunswick. The place is along the coast and houses, at most, a couple of hundred people. Most of it looks sort of frozen in the 1970s, and you can tell by the sun-beaten signs that not a lot has changed since then. We made our way to the old summer home at the edge of town. It was the kind of place where you needed firewood to keep warm in the winter, and where your water might suddenly run out. There was a well on the property. Electricity was spotty at best, and there was a massive wasp nest hanging from the southwestern corner of the roof. Still, it was exactly what we bargained for. Cheap country living. Our stay there took some time getting used to, but by Friday night, we were having a blast. We took a rowboat out to a sauna on a small island and had margaritas. We spent Saturday touring the town and having a bite to eat at the local pub. We met one of the local fishermen who offered to take us out on a trip on Sunday, which we all heartily agreed to. Subsequently, Sunday turned out great. Sure, we had to get up early, but we were feasting on freshly smoked lobster by the end of the day. We were having a bit of trouble though. There were a couple of locals who weren't all enthused about a bunch of metropolitan women coming to see their town. So we had to endure more than a handful of nasty comments. They were just stupid kids, but it was probably the worst part of the trip. There was this one blonde kid with a white shirt that just refused to stop smirking at us. His baby sister, aged 10 or 12, didn't seem all too enthused either. When Sunday rolled around, we were ready to go home. Before we did, Kelly decided to give us a final tour. Mary remarked on something peculiar, that there was no church in town. "Towns like this always got a church," she commented. "It's just strange is all." "It's the bedrock," Kelly commented. "Most of the town is built on solid bedrock." So just build a church on the bedrock. Can't have a graveyard built on bedrock, Kelly shrugged. Most folks who died back in the day were shipped off to either Brunswick or Wiscasset. Kelly stopped for a moment, considering something. Checking her phone, she nodded. We got time. She smiled. You gotta see this one last thing. The Casket cellar. She took us to the north side of town. We followed a dirt road into the woods, where there was this bulging dirt mound. Not just like a pile, but like a small structure. It was clearly man-made, but hadn't been used in decades. It was covered in wildflowers in the perfect circle, like a place of worship. There was a solid oak door in the middle of it. The road was severely overgrown with weeds and fallen trees, showing just how few people went out of their way to see this place. A couple of rusted-out logging machines lay to the side. Just looking at them made me feel like I needed a tetanus shot. This is one of the few patches of land around that isn't just solid rock, Kelly said. It was too small to build a graveyard, but they figured they could make a kind of storage. A storage for what? Annie squinted at her. For a while it was logging stuff, but back in the day it was dead folks. Like, you know, a temporary thing before the bodies were shipped off north. So it's like a cooler, a cellar, said Mary. Yeah, Kelly nodded. People don't use it anymore, but it's sort of a morbid local curio. We all fell silent for a moment. Kelly turned to me with the biggest grin. Wanna check it out? Of course we wanted to see it. We were 4 women in our mid-30s hopped up on true crime podcasts and Stephen King novels. This was the sort of thing that gave me the goosebumps. I'd never heard of anything like it. A body cellar? Sick. The door took some convincing to open, but we managed to squeeze through. The air was damp and cool, much colder than expected. Using our phones as flashlights, we walked down a narrow set of stone steps, deeper into the ground. The cellar was about 9 by 9 feet, and we had to crouch not to hit our heads on the ceiling at times. The ground was solid bedrock, but the walls were a combination of propped up planks and deep dirt holes. This reminded me of the wasp nest back at the house, where you could see these deep chambers built into it. It was the same here. About a dozen holes in the wall, going deep into the dirt. Of course, there was nothing there. The place hadn't been used for decades, maybe even a century. There was some kind of opening, somewhere, as I could feel a puff of cold air going through the room, but I couldn't see any ventilation or opening. To add to the ambience, Kelly decided to light an oil lamp she found in the corner. We were a bit skeptical, but it seemed to work well enough. She hung it on a hook in the middle of the room. The light flickered a little as we turned off our flashlights and looked around the room. There were these small notches in every hole where caskets were once slid in. There were tools along the left-hand wall, things like hooks to drag the bodies out, hammers and rusted nails to fix broken casket lids, masks to shield workers from swarms of flies. Every item told a story, and once you put it all together, it painted a grim picture. This place had been something real and sorrowful. This wasn't a tourist attraction. It was a remnant of a grim reality. This was a place of necessity, not curiosity. I felt a little bad about it, and suggested we leave. Mary and Kelly wanted to take a couple of pictures, so they asked me to help. They sat down by the edge of one of those holes and pretended to look scared. I took a couple of photos while Mary giggled about having a new Tinder pic. I wasn't amused. It was too morbid. The cellar was uncomfortable. We turned to leave, hurrying up the stairs. Annie was first. As she reached the door and pushed on it, she stopped. She pushed again and again. "It's stuck," she said. Hold on." She tried a couple more times but couldn't get it to budge. She switched places with Kelly, who was the more athletically gifted of us. Kelly gave it a proper shoulder push, but the door didn't move an inch. She gave it another push, a kick, and an impressive effort, but it didn't move. Then I heard something. Giggling. It was those kids. They'd locked us in and put something against the door. Annie yelled at them to let us out, or we'd press charges. That just made them giggle more. It didn't take long until we could hear them leave, with a faint "bye" echoing off in the distance, while Kelly and Mary took turns punishing the door. Annie and I tried to get a signal on our phones. Even at the very top of the stairs, we were still underground and off the grid. This place was isolated, and we couldn't get a signal through. Kelly and Mary came back down dripping with sweat. Annie was curled up in a corner trying not to panic. There was no doubt about it. We were stuck, for the time being. Maybe someone else could pass by and let us out. Kelly tried to use some of the tools to break the door, but it didn't work. The hammers were termite-ridden, and the handles were falling apart. There was a saw, but the blade was rusted straight through. There were hooks for dragging out caskets, but these were useless when it came to breaking doors or hinges. We were stuck down there for a couple of hours. Things were getting dark outside, and we could feel a wind growing colder. Annie was having some sort of panic attack, and had resorted to desperately pounding on the door, screaming for help. The rhythmic thumping and yelling were boring into my brain, to the point where I could still hear it in the quiet moments where she stopped. Kelly had run her phone battery dry trying to find a spot with a signal. Mary had just fully given up and collapsed against the wall, taking a stress-induced nap. The oil lamp was still burning strong. Kelly had tried to set the door on fire, but it just wouldn't catch on. The air was too damp, and it only resulted in smoke blowing down into the cellar. It seemed that no matter how hard we tried, we couldn't MacGyver ourselves out of this one anytime soon. It was getting annoying since we all had work in the morning, and we'd have to drive late into the night to make it back on time at this rate. Inevitably, we turned on one another, blaming each other for provoking the locals, for not keeping the door open, for going there in the first place. Annie went on a long rant about how we all could have gone to Aruba instead, where she had a half-sister who ran a bar. Mary had fully checked out at that point, turning from napping to silently weeping. There was no way that we'd be left there for long. If the kids had found us, others would too. We just have to make sure we're heard, I said. That's all we can do. We took turns pounding on the door, calling out for help. Even Mary joined in, although not as energetically as the rest of us. We rationed our water bottles, sharing what little we had between us. It went on and on for hours. Banging on the door, call for help. Banging on the door, call for help. Over and over and over. We were lucky that Cellar was empty, or that kind of brain-dead monotony would be annoying enough to wake the dead. It got colder a lot quicker as the sun set. There'd already been an overcast during the day, so we figured it wouldn't be long until it started to rain. Maybe someone would come looking for us in the morning. The four of us not showing up for work ought to raise a few eyebrows. We huddled together for warmth, watching the light of the oil lamp flicker back and forth. There was a cold chill reaching us, pulling me back from the brink of an exhausted sleep over and over. It must have been close to midnight when I looked up to see Annie standing in the middle of the room, staring down the holes in the wall. She was breathing heavy, as if trying to psych herself up. I squinted at her, trying to get the sleep out of my eyes. "What are you doing?" I whispered, as to not wake the others. "I heard something," she said. In there. She pointed straight into one of the holes. As she did, an icy wind swept through the cellar, swirling the dirt around and stinging my nose. Mary shuddered in her sleep. I'm gonna look, said Annie. Real quick. I got up and stood behind her. She crawled into the hole face first. She could barely move, but I promised to pull her out by her feet if I had to. As she got to the back of the hole, I couldn't see anything but her shoes sticking out. Anything? I asked. No, she sighed. I think it's just some... She stopped. Another wind passed through the room, this time a little stronger. The oil lamp swayed and fell off the hook, falling to the ground with a clunk. The flame went out as Mary and Kelly sprung awake. For a moment, everything went deathly quiet. I felt this strange sensation in my chest, something tightening over my ribs like my blood constricting, something poking my heart to provoke it into racing. Annie? I whispered. Nothing. I picked the lamp up, lit it, and hung it back up. I could see her feet dangling at the edge of the hole, not moving an inch. Then she moved. A sudden lurch. Her legs motionless, moving further down the hole, as if something was dragging her in by the head. I grabbed her foot and felt a tug on the other end. A sudden pull and her shoe came off. The hole went deeper than we thought. A lot deeper. Mary and Kelly panicked. Mary rushed up the stairs and resumed banging on the door while Kelly battled against her instincts to follow Annie into the hole. She poked her head in to look, but couldn't bring herself to go further, instead pulling at her own hair in frustration. I didn't even notice how I'd stumbled backwards into the opposite end of the room, flattening myself against the wall. It was subconscious. As Mary and Kelly panicked, running back and forth, all I could do was look at Annie's shoe. It still lay there at the edge of the hole, the same hole we'd used for a nice profile picture earlier in the day. A stray thought hit me. I still had some battery left on my phone. Not much, but a little. As the screams for help faded into screams for Annie, I fumbled through my photo album. I didn't even notice how much my fingers were shaking until I had to precision tap which image to view, where I picked the wrong one at least 3 times. Finally, I brought up the picture of Kelly and Mary standing in front of the hole. The flash had gone off, giving them a bit of an eerie glow, but it also allowed me to see straight into the hole behind them. There were these 10 white spots in the dirt, laid out in a sort of crescent semicircle. They were too dull to be eyes or glass. They weren't really reflective. My mind wandered as I pondered the possibilities. My eyes blurred looking away from the screen and down onto my dirty hands, my pale thumbs, holding the device in a cramp. Looking back at the picture, I couldn't help but to see a similarity. 2 sets of 5, deep in the dirt. Fingers. I looked down the oil lamp and carefully moved up to the hole. Kelly and Mary joined me. We looked inside, only to see that the back end of the wall was gone. Instead, it was just this hole going deeper and deeper into the dirt, at a slight tilt. This wasn't just an abandoned cellar. It was something's nest. We all stopped to listen. Further in, almost as if coming from below our feet, we could hear a sound travel. The faint noise of fabric being torn, the pops of buttons coming off, and zippers being torn open, the shuffling of hair, then a sickening crunch, the breaking of bones. We backed away. Mary was having trouble breathing. Kelly tried to calm her down, carefully stroking her shoulders, hushing her. We spoke in whispers, leaving the oil lamp hanging in the middle of the room. "We're not getting out," Kelly whispered. "We have to wait until they find us." "There's something in there," I whispered back. "We have to do something." "We gotta get Annie out," sobbed Mary. "We can't leave her in there." "I'm not sticking my head in, and neither are any of you," Kelly snapped back. "We're getting out, and we're getting help." We all decided to try one thing each. Mary was going to check one of the other holes to see if there were any other tunnels, possibly leading outside. There was fresh air coming from somewhere, so there had to be some kind of connection to the surface. Kelly was going to block the hole where Annie had disappeared. We all collected our spare jackets, shoes, and backpacks, stuffing it in the hole along with any tools and debris we could find along the cellar. I was going to try and call for help again. There was a slight gap at the bottom of the door where I could slide the phone through. It might be just enough to get a bar. I used a long sleeve of plastic from a Slim Jim and put it under the phone, so I could drag it back in carefully. I put the phone down, pressed to call, and slid it out, hoping those extra inches would be enough. It briefly sounded like a call went through, but I couldn't hear anyone picking up. It was raining outside by now, and the sound drowned out everything else. There was cold water dripping through the door, staining the stone steps on the way down. We weren't going anywhere anytime soon. By the time I dragged my phone back in, the battery was as dead as the rest of the place. Going back up the stairs, I almost slipped. I caught my grip, but looked at the surprised faces of Kelly and Mary, standing in the middle of the cellar. "You alright?" Kelly asked. I nodded. Before I got to respond, I saw something moving in one of the other holes. A forearm, almost 3 feet long, reaching out into the room. I pointed at it, screaming, just as another wind swept through the room, this time blowing out the flame of the oil lamp completely. There was commotion. I couldn't tell who screamed the most, Kelly, Mary, or me. Someone was in pain. One voice grew more distant and suddenly stopped, a dragging noise dwarfed by panicked crying. I touched the walls. I forced myself to think of my own body. I was unharmed. I was all right. But someone down there wasn't. That was just it. Down there. It was down there, not up the stairs. "Come up here," I whispered. "Up the stairs." A quiet sobbing. Step by step, someone came up the stairs. The thought hit me that it might be none of them. It could be Annie. It could be whatever took her. There was no way to be sure. And with the last light snuffed out, there was nothing to prevent my mind from filling in the blanks. As a hand grabbed my leg, I screamed, startling poor Kelly, who was the one coming up. We made our way to the top of the stairs, pushing our backs against the door. We made ourselves small and tried to keep quiet. A sliver of light made its way through the cracks in the door. For a good half an hour or so, we just sat there, trying to find the courage to speak. Finally, Kelly whispered to me. It grabbed her ankle," she said. "It crept along the floor and grabbed her ankle." Instinctively, I moved my feet up and hugged my knees close to my chest. "Did you see it?" I whispered back. "Just the fingers," she said. "It had really long fingers." My leg cramped up, and I stopped feeling anything in my toes. I couldn't move, and neither could Kelly. We could barely breathe. I tried to listen past the pitter-patter of rain, but there was nothing coming from downstairs. Instead, my mind filled in the blanks, imagining all kinds of noises. I could almost hear the way Annie pounded on the door, calling for help. I could hear Mary's gentle weeping, and if I let my mind stray just a little bit too far, I could hear the snapping of bones and the ripping of fabric. My pulse was racing so hard it hurt my head, making me bob my neck back and forth like a fish out of water. Kelly didn't say a word. We just held each other close, waiting second by second for dawn to come. It must have been an hour, maybe two, before I heard something. There was a shuffling noise outside on the other side of the door. I perked up to listen and Kelly did the same. Footsteps. Someone walking by. I saw the outline of Kelly's face as we looked at one another, quietly contemplating our options. Then, a voice. "Are you still in there?" A young girl, maybe 10 or 12. We'd seen her run with the local kids. "Yes," Kelly whispered back. "You need to go get help. Call the police, and you need to open the door." "I can't do that," the girl sighed. "The chipper they put there is really heavy. I can't." "Then you need to go get help," Kelly roared. "Right now." The girl took off immediately. For what purpose, we couldn't tell. Maybe she was gonna get help. Maybe she got scared off. We didn't know. Either way, she was gone. And shortly after, there was a sound coming from downstairs. A chill wind blowing through the cellar, carrying a strange, musty scent. We tensed up. I held my breath. A light tip-tap of something poking against the stone steps. Then nothing. I looked at Kelly and held her hand. Then she was pulled down. It was quick. She held onto my wrist like her life depended on it, and I slid down 3 steps. I held on to her and pulled, but the force at the other end was too strong. She kicked and screamed like a wounded animal, but nothing seemed to work. Finally, something came loose, and she scampered back up the stairs. Pushing ourselves against the door, I could see her foot was bleeding. Her shoe had come off, and at least 2 toes were broken at a strange angle. There were marks along the middle of her foot. Bite marks. I could see the imprint of human molars on her big toe. We huddled against the door. Kelly's eyes were wide with panic, scratching at the wood until her acrylic nails came off. It didn't take long for it to return, a long white arm making its way up the stairs, a hand tip-tapping against the stone steps like a spider, and far down into the dark, I could see 3 pairs of eyes reflecting the sliver of moonlight coming through the door. 6 eyes, parted into sets of 2. We threw our shoes. We kicked. We screamed. It retreated only to try again and again and again. As soon as there was a moment of quiet, it came back, poking and prodding at our readiness. In a moment of silence, Kelly and I just held one another. I eventually came to realize that there was a new sound coming from downstairs. It had been there for some time, but we'd been too busy to notice it. A low rhythmic hum like a deep cackle. A laugh. It had stopped playing with us. Seconds later, 2 arms shot out of the dark, one grabbing me by the hair, the other grabbing Kelly by the throat. We were immediately pulled down step by step by step. Within seconds, I could feel the floor as we reached the cellar. My hands fumbled for something to grab, only to feel the glass shards of the now broken oil lamp next to me. Grabbing the largest shard I could, I let it sink into my palm as I stabbed what had grabbed me over and over and over. The moment it let go, I dove for Kelly. I drove the shard into the pale white arm grabbing her, forcing it to let go. A dark blue kind of blood, thicker than jelly, pooled around the edge of the shard as both arms sunk back into the holes. Kelly was barely breathing, struggling to get air past her neck. I grabbed her under her arms and tiptoed my way back up the stairs, only to see those white arms slowly coming back out. I couldn't survive another attack. It'd be our last. I dragged Kelly back up the stairs, hoping against hope we'd make it somehow. She kicked helplessly at the white fingers that poked at her wounded feet, teasing her, a reminder that it was going to get her next time. Laughter. No, Kelly mumbled with what little breath she could muster. No. We reached the top of the stairs. The arms grew closer, nails tip-tapping against the stone steps. It was joyful, eager, expectant. I pressed my back against the door. If it came to it, I would have no choice but to drop Kelly. I had to do whatever it took to make it out. I remember coming to that conscious decision that if it came down to it, I'd do it. I had to. Then I lost my balance. The door gave out from behind me as it opened. I fell backwards, keeping Kelly in my arms. A sudden burst of moonlight lit up the hallway as a mound of pale limbs retreated into the dark. The local kids had pulled an old, rusted-out machine aside, unlodging the door. Kelly coughed, crawling away from the entrance to see a grown woman crawling through the dirt like that in a panicked weeping. I'll never get that image out of my head. Even the kids who trapped us seemed shocked. We thought you could open it," one of them said. "It wasn't meant to get stuck." The blonde kid with the white shirt, he wasn't smirking anymore. I just stayed there in the rain, the palm of my hand slipping on a couple of trampled petals from a blue sunflower. I looked at the cellar, unblinking. Even then, despite the rain and the excuses and the weeping, I could hear the tip-tapping of nails against the stone steps. Something waited for us to slip up, for someone to look the other way, for another chance to take it all away in the blink of an eye. This was a couple of years ago, as I mentioned. It was all written up as an animal attack, but there wasn't even an attempt to elaborate. Just an animal attack. The local sheriff ordered the place permanently closed so they could just fill it up with gravel and dirt. They never recovered Mary or Annie. They never even said what happened to them. Kelly had to amputate part of her foot, but was otherwise fine. But she, like me, wasn't going to be the same ever again. That's why I sleep with the lights on, and something playing on my laptop. As soon as the dark gets too dark, or the silence gets too loud, my mind fills in the blanks with something from that night. The weeping, the banging on the door, the tip-tapping of nails against stone. And I will do what it takes to drown that out for the rest of my life. I'm pretty sure I've just broken up with my girlfriend of 8 years and need some advice on whether or not I did the right thing. I've tried talking to my friends and family about what's been happening over the last month, but every time I open my mouth, I struggle to work out what to say or how to begin. They all know Sam, and if I told them how she's been behaving, I'm not sure they'd believe me. They'd probably just tell me that it's all in my head. And maybe it is, but right now, that feels irrelevant. I'm just glad it's over. Before I get into the story proper, I want to talk about my relationship with Sam a little bit. Most couples, especially young ones, don't make it to their 8th anniversary, and if they do, they're often drifting apart. This wasn't the case with me and Sam, at least not from my perspective. I still loved her, and it seemed as if she still loved me. We spent all our time together. We made each other laugh. We had sex on a regular basis. We were even talking about having kids. That's what made her behavior so shocking. I didn't see it coming at all. The first time it happened, we were in bed. We'd both had a long day and were pretty tired, so after a quick dinner, we dragged ourselves upstairs. She went through her usual nighttime routine, washing her face, moisturizing, applying various creams and lotions that I can never remember the name of. And then she read for a bit. She only managed about 5 pages before her head started to nod. I remember taking the book from her hands, kissing her on the forehead, and reaching for the light. And it was then, as I turned, that I heard it, a raspy whisper. At first I thought Sam had said the name Elizabeth, so I asked, "What was that?" But she just replied, "Hmm?" or something similar. She was on her side, facing away from me, and sounded almost drunk with tiredness. "Don't worry," I said, turning off the light. To be honest, I didn't think much of it that first time. I wasn't even sure she'd made the sound. I told myself it was a noise from outside, or maybe something to do with the plumbing. That's what I was thinking as I closed my eyes, and it was only when I was nodding off that it occurred to me that the noise sounded less like the name Elizabeth and more like two words, little B word. But at that point, I was past caring, and seconds later I was asleep. I didn't think about it the next morning. We both got up and showered, made breakfast together, and then headed to our separate offices. I had back-to-back calls all morning, so I didn't have time to think about anything but marketing budgets until lunch. When I came downstairs, Sam had prepared a caprese salad. It was a nice day, so we ate outside in our tiny garden. She complained about her clients, and we talked about maybe visiting her mother at the weekend, as she was ill. Everything was normal, and when I got back to my desk, I whiled away the afternoon, half-heartedly reviewing ads for our next campaign. At 4, I clocked off early and went down to the living room. Sam usually worked until 5:30 or 6, so I thought I'd watch Netflix while I waited. Her office is next to the living room, so I tend to turn the volume down while she's working. Anyway, I chose a show. Chef's Table, I think it was, and zoned out watching some American guy make pizza dough. I was just about to start the second episode when I heard a noise. Right away I was transported to the previous evening. It was the same raspy whispering, maybe a little louder this time, and instead of one word, it sounded like a whole conversation. It was coming from her office. I turned the TV off, and the whispering seemed to grow louder. I couldn't hear any actual words, just a crackly hum. I called her name, but she didn't reply, so I got up and walked towards her office. She didn't look around when I entered. The room was silent. I don't remember exactly what we said, but it was something like, "Me. Hey, Sam. What's up?" She didn't turn around. I remember that. Just kept looking at her screen. Me. "Did you say something?" "Nope." Weird. I thought I heard something. Like whispering. Whispering? "Yes. Were you watching something?" "Nope. Maybe it came from downstairs." "Maybe." She turned around then and smiled. "I'll only be another 20, she said. "Okay." Moments later I was back on the couch, and when Sam joined me, the rest of the evening was normal. We had dinner, watched TV, went to bed, and when I reached for the light, there was no weird noise. Even so, I lay awake for at least an hour. I was certain that the whispering had come from Sam's office, which made me think she definitely said something when we were in bed the night before. My first thought, and don't judge me for this, was that there was something wrong with her. She'd been under a lot of pressure at work, and maybe this was some reaction to stress. I decided that if it happened a third time, I would bring it up with her. I didn't have to wait long. The following day she went into the office and then went for drinks after work. My day was uneventful, although the house felt oddly creepy given what had happened over the previous 2 days. Sam came home around 12. I feigned sleep when she came in, and she didn't wake me. I could tell from the way she was moving and taking off her clothes that she was pretty drunk, and I expected her to do what she usually did, fall asleep in sub-0 seconds, and then maybe snore for a bit. but she didn't. When she got into bed, she went silent. Minutes passed. Normally, this would have put me at ease. No snoring tonight. But that night, it seemed ominous. Even so, after about half an hour, I started to drift off. I was on the brink of unconsciousness when I heard it. 2 words, whispered directly in my ear, so close I could feel her breath on my cheek. Little B word. I scrambled for the lamp and almost fell out of bed. Eventually, I hooked the switch and the lights flickered on. I turned to look at Sam. She was facing away from me and appeared to be asleep. "Sam?" I said. No reply. I repeated her name louder this time, then a third time. I shook her shoulder hard. "What?" she said. She sounded groggy, but I could tell she was angry. "What was that?" I said. She rolled over. "What was what?" "You just whispered in my ear." "No, I didn't." "You did." "Mark, I was asleep." I think that was the first time I considered there may be something wrong with me. "I heard something," I said. "Sure you weren't dreaming?" "No," I said. "I mean, yes, I'm sure I wasn't dreaming." "Well, I didn't say anything." She rolled over again. I weighed my options. "Okay, sorry," I said eventually. She didn't reply. I rolled onto my back and looked at the ceiling. There were 2 possibilities. Either one of us was losing our mind, or she was lying. And if she was lying, she was either messing with me or tormenting me. The former seemed unlikely. Sam didn't go in for practical jokes. So she was tormenting me. The question was, why? There was only one reason that I could think of. Almost a year before all of this started, I had cheated on Sam. It was stupid, cliché of a situation. I'd gone for after-work drinks with some colleagues, and after countless pints, I'd ended up kissing someone. I won't say who, as I don't want to get them into trouble, but it meant nothing, and I wasn't even the one who instigated it, if that makes any difference. You probably think I'm a horrible person, but I meant everything I wrote earlier. I loved Sam, still do, and see the kiss as nothing more than a stupid, drunken, one-time thing. I wasn't about to embark on some kind of affair. Even so, I didn't tell Sam about it. She has always had a zero-tolerance policy on infidelity, and I was certain that if she found out, she'd leave me. But what if she had found out, and this odd behavior was her way of punishing me? I barely remembered the kiss, but I knew that it happened outside a pub in Covent Garden. Not exactly discreet. One of my colleagues could have seen us, or one of our friends maybe. Perhaps word had gotten back to her, and instead of lashing out, she decided to torture me instead. It didn't seem like something Sam would do, but I knew how she felt about cheating, and to be honest, the alternative, impending madness, seemed more frightening. The next morning we had breakfast together in the living room. This wasn't unusual. We liked to carve out moments together away from our desks. She didn't mention what had happened the night before, and I didn't bring it up. I'd decided I was going to tell her about the kiss, but in the moment I bottled it. Instead, I said something like, "Hey, are we okay?" She turned to me, still chewing her toast, and frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" she said. "Are you happy with me? With us?" She took my hand. "Where's this come from?" "I don't know. I just feel a bit disconnected from you, I guess." "I don't think there's anything wrong," she said. Her voice was gentle. "Do you?" "No," I said. "No, look, I'm sorry. I love you." "I love you too," she said, squeezing my hand. I let out a heavy sigh. I hadn't realized how much I needed to hear those words. "I'm sorry. I think I'm just getting in my head. Probably spent too much time in the house this week. She smiled. Let's go for a walk at lunch. And then she went back to her toast. At first I felt good, as if we'd cleared the air, but I quickly realized that nothing had changed. She didn't know about the kiss, or if she did, she wasn't willing to bring it up. Complete mental breakdowns was still a possibility. The following week passed without incident. There was no whispering between rooms, no late-night verbal abuse. I was still thinking about discussing the whispering with Sam, but it seemed a bit silly now. And to be honest, I didn't want to frighten her. I would tell her about the kiss, but not right away. When the time was right. I remember we got takeaway on that Friday night and watched Sharknado while getting drunk on homemade margaritas. 2 days later, I left our flat, and I haven't been back since. As with other incidents, there was no build-up to what happened on Saturday night. We'd spent the day in London, visiting a gallery and having some drinks with friends. We came home, had sex, and then went to bed. I was woken up around 2 a.m. I heard the whispering again, but it was different this time, like a rhythmic chant. Little B word over and over and over. I immediately groped for the lamp and snapped it on. The voice fell silent. I turned to question Sam, but to my surprise, she was gone. Her side of the bed was neatly folded down, which was odd, as I'd seen her get under the covers. I called out her name, but she didn't reply. My first thought was that she was in the bathroom, but the door to our ensuite was open and the room was dark. Sam? I called again. And then I saw her, or rather, I saw her eyes. Our bedroom opens out onto a small landing that leads to a staircase. That night the bedroom door was open, and from the glow of the lamp, I could just about make out the banisters and the shadowy stairwell. And there she was. She was peering between the banisters. I don't know how else to describe it. I could only see the top half of her head from the nose up, but the light was catching her hair and reflecting off her eyes. She was staring at me between the wooden bars. No, not just staring. Glaring. Sam? I said again, whispering this time. She didn't reply. I sat in bed for a while. I'm not sure how long. She didn't move or look away. She continued to stare. She didn't blink. Her eyelids seemed to have disappeared completely. I got up and stood beside the bed. Her eyes followed me, but her head was perfectly still. I won't lie. I was afraid. I took one step and then another, her eyes moving ever so slightly to cover my movements. I wanted to look away, but I was mesmerized. It was like staring at a stranger, and although her eyes were wide and intense, they were also dull and empty, like those of a drunk. Sam? I said again. She was standing in the doorframe now, about to step into the hall. I reached for the light switch, but didn't press it. I was truly terrified, too scared to breathe. The switch felt like a trigger. When I pressed it, she would start screaming, run at me, pull me down the stairs, and smash my head against the steps. But those eyes, she was still staring at me, unblinking, unmoving, turning the dial on my fear until I could barely move, hardly think. I flicked the switch. The naked bulb pinged into life, and I squinted against the glare. I looked down at Sam and saw that she was blinking and holding a hand up to block the light. Then she looked down at her feet and through the banisters towards our bed. Her face was scrunched up, her eyes slits, and her face puffy. "What happened?" she said eventually. "I don't know," I said. "Was I sleepwalking?" "I don't know." Something about my voice must have betrayed my fear or my suspicion. "Are you okay?" she said. Yeah, fine. She moved to touch me, but I flinched away. What's up? She said. I could tell she was hurt and annoyed. You were whispering again. What? Her face fell, and I saw something in her eyes. Disbelief, maybe, and something else. Defensiveness. What was I saying? It doesn't matter, I said. Mark, come on. She was fully awake now, and her eyes were bright. Look, we're tired. Let's go to sleep. She nodded, but I could tell she was still upset. I'm going to sleep on the sofa. Really? She said. I nodded and headed to the spare room for bedding. When I moved back to the landing, she'd closed the door and the bedroom light was off. I didn't sleep the rest of that night, and in the morning I told her everything. About the kiss and the 2 words she'd been saying over and over again. Naturally, she focused on the kiss, and when I stupidly told her that it didn't matter, and that the whispering was more important, she just became more angry. Eventually, I offered to leave, and she agreed that I should. A week passed with no word. I wrote out a few messages, apologies, and longer, more argumentative messages about the whispering, but I didn't send any of them in the end. I kept thinking about the glaring, the whispering. Was that how she really felt about me? And if she hadn't known about the kiss, then why did she feel that way? What had I done wrong? It could have been a subconscious thing, or maybe it was senseless and random, but I realized it had affected me. I wasn't ready to go back to her. I couldn't face the idea of sharing a bed with her. I eventually messaged her saying I needed to take some time. She thought that was a good idea. That was 3 weeks ago. She hasn't been in touch since. I'm not sure if we've broken up or if we're on a break, but I don't see myself shaking this feeling anytime soon. There are moments when I think I overreacted, and maybe I should have been more sensitive. Maybe she is suffering some sort of episode and she needs my support. But then I remember what it was like in that room when she was glaring at me. The tone of her voice when she whispered those 2 words in my ear. Knowing that someone else has experienced something like this would be of great help. I've had a look online and can't find anything. It wasn't sleepwalking. Not really. And I don't think I'm losing my mind. Like I said, I do love Sam and still want to be with her, but I need answers before I can move forward. Please, message me in the comments section below. This was by no means my dream home, but it was a cheaper place to stay than my last one and a lot closer to work. The real estate agent was giving me the whole tour, and then we went into the basement and that's when I saw it. At the end of the basement hallway was a large iron door. We couldn't get that open, and it seems to be rusted shut. Don't worry, we think it's just an old food storage room. I wasn't really worried about it. In fact, I was curious as to what may have been behind that door. I signed the paperwork, and for $280,000, the 2-bedroom, 1-bathroom was mine. It was about a month in, and I had fully completed the move. I then procured tools needed to breach the iron door under my house. I used Sawzall, blow torches, and pry bars. After a week of working on it, I finally got the door to come off its hinges. I backed away as it fell to the ground with a loud, echoing thud, and then looked on the other side of the frame to see a large mine, complete with structure beams and a mine cart that stood motionless. The first thing I did was call my friends, Ashley and Jack, to come take a look at it. They fancied themselves urban explorers, and if anyone was going to have the right tools for the job, it would be them. Jack was thrilled. He thought it might have been an abandoned gold mine. Ashley, on the other hand, was skeptical about why it was abandoned and locked in the first place. I, for one, should have listened to Ashley. We spent the day acquiring gear, ropes, flashlights, provisions, also pencil and paper for a map, and finally a camcorder. We ventured down into the mine's opening, small and claustrophobic. It was so dead silent I could hear the sound of water coming from further in the caves. Maybe there's an underground river nearby, Jake says enthusiastically. As we walked through the tunnels, we could see that they seemed to be mining coal. It was getting harder to distinguish things because the walls were starting to get covered in thick webs. Layer upon layers of sticky silk stretched across the beams, and even trying to block our path. Jake had a pocket knife and was able to cut through it for us, but it dulled the blade and was a daunting task. What could make a web this big? I immediately got my answer when we shined our light down the hallways that illuminated the biggest spider I had ever seen in my life. It skittered into a rock fissure above us, but it was so big I could hear its sickening footsteps across the wall. Its legs were long, black, and spindly. It had a green pattern on its back, and 8 large eyes that reflected light. Did you guys see that? No way I imagined it. Jake continued to walk forward, and as he did, his foot stepped on something that almost caused him to trip. It was a human skull. Looking around, we could see the skeletal remains of many, each wearing miners' hats, and each bound to the walls with cobwebs. That's when we noticed that mine went into a large cavern, and when we shined our lights on it, our blood collectively ran cold. At the heart of this cavern was a colossal spider the size of a small house or a large shed. 8 eyes reflected the light back at us, and venom dripped from fangs that looked more like katana blades. Surrounding it were dozens upon dozens of spiders like the one we had seen earlier. We turned around and we booked it. We didn't give them a chance to catch up to us, though as we ran through the webbing, we could hear skittering across the walls as though they were giving pursuit. Luckily for us, they weren't fast. Ashley dropped the camcorder and grabbed the map as we ran through the tunnels. We could hear the sound of crawling fade away, and noticed it made the same sound as what we thought was running water. We figured this meant they had given up the chase as we got further away. As soon as we made it back to the surface, I wasted no time in packing everything up, and getting out of there, hoping to stay at a hotel until I could sell the house and get a new one. The next day I went back to the house to repack everything back up to put it in storage, for as long as it took me to find a house that wasn't teeming with spiders. I told them that I managed to open the iron door, and the mine began seeping poison gas into the house. I didn't tell them about the spiders because they wouldn't believe me. I am writing this on my laptop from a hotel, nerves shot with the newfound arachnophobia. Jake and Ashley don't talk about the mines or the event, and they have given up on urban exploring. But the thing that bothers me is, if those spiders were down there for so long, what or who were they feeding on? When I was a kid, I watched a lot of TV. Heck, I watched it so much my parents didn't let me keep one in my room. They, correctly, thought I'd stay up all night watching cartoons or weird sci-fi movies. Then Katrina hit New Orleans. We got out safe, but our house was in such bad shape we had to move into an apartment miles away from all of my friends. My folks felt bad about the situation, so they set up a 9-inch set on my desk and made me promise to go to bed on time. That promise was swiftly broken. The TV had a headphone jack, and I managed to score a compatible set by trading some kid at school a Blue Eyes White Dragon. As long as I wasn't too loud, I was free to watch whatever, whenever. Those days were rough, so it was nice having something I could lean on when I started missing home. One Saturday night, I was flipping through like usual when a bumper I'd never seen before caught my attention. The bumper faded in on an image of a clown dressed entirely in black sitting on a stool in the middle of an empty white room. I know what you're probably picturing, but she wasn't scary at all. In fact, there was something inviting about her. Curious, I put down the remote and settled in to see what would happen. The clown pulled out a pocket watch and showed it to the camera. The second the hands hit 11 o'clock, the tip of her mouth ticked up into a gentle smirk. She put the watch away and said, "It's 11 o'clock, kiddies. You should be in bed, but since you're not, welcome to the Crossing Hour. We have some new viewers tuning in tonight, so let me give you a quick rundown." She looked around and motioned for the camera to come closer. The camera zoomed in until the clown's face filled the screen. I noticed her irises were yellow. She winked and I blushed. I felt like I'd been caught doing something embarrassing. "I'm your host, Reagan Sorrows," the clown said. "Here's how this works. 11 to midnight, everything's spooky fun and games. Midnight to 1, we cross over to something much, much scarier. Younger viewers should probably switch off once we shift to the black room. That means you, hon." The camera pulled out just enough to catch Reagan pointing at the screen. I knew it was silly, but it felt like the comment was aimed directly at me. Naturally, I was hooked. After catching that first broadcast, I watched Crossing Hour every Saturday night without fail. Every week the programming changed, and you never got the same combination of shows 2 weeks in a row. I didn't know about variety shows or stuff like The Wonderful World of Disney at the time, so the idea of never knowing what I was going to get was a real thrill. The block always started with the White Room shows. None of Crossing Hour's programming had age ratings, but the White Rooms seemed to be more or less for all ages. I can't remember everything I watched on it, but a few stand out. Almost every week there was a new episode of Heck Busters. It was like X-Files for kids, but with a higher budget than shows like Goosebumps. Every episode followed a different team of kids as they investigated some spooky happening around the world. Some of the teams were used multiple times, some just once. The through line was that they were all members of Heck Busters International, a sort of boy/girl scouts for monster hunters. My favorite kid was David. He was a loner, but he was really smart and knew a lot about how to trap ghosts and fight werewolves and stuff. Even better, we had the same name, so I could pretend I was the one fighting monsters and helping out my friends. His group got the most episodes, which I was always really happy about. Grimm's Palace was a puppet show about the Grim Reaper. I want to say it was a parody of little kids' shows like Bear in the Big Blue House, but there was something weirdly sincere about it. Grim, as the Reaper insisted the audience call him, was trying his best to be one of those cool uncle types for the viewer. The catch was his palace was full of demons and weird creatures that annoyed the heck out of him. So most of the time, he'd end up getting angry, and the episode's intended plot would go out the window. There was always a moral, but it was presented so poorly, I usually ignored it and laughed at the shenanigans Grim got into. Not going to lie. A couple of the lessons landed. I still think about the conflict de-escalation episode since it's the one time Grim managed to keep his cool. Stopped clocks, I guess. The Timing was a cartoon that's hard to describe. Every episode features a giant humanoid statue that occasionally plonks into a different time period. A crowd would gather around the statue and debate what it was before the statue stood up and started to walk around. What followed was usually some sort of trippy chase scene, involving the statue transporting people through time and space on a whim. At the time, I couldn't wrap my head around it. I think if I watched it now, I'd like it more. Some of the visuals were pretty out there. Tony's Rat Time Kitchen only ran once, as you might expect. It was a cooking show starring a giant rat named Tony. It played out like a regular cooking show, but all of the ingredients were moldy and rotten. There wasn't any music, and it didn't seem like Tony had an audience. But he kept acting like he did for some reason. It didn't help that Tony was kind of disturbing. The way he moved wasn't right. He was too fluid to be a puppet, but the proportions were so stretched out. He couldn't have been a guy in a suit either. His eyes were constantly moving too, never settling on one thing. He was so manic it was like he was drugged or something. At the end of the program, Tony took a bite out of his nasty-looking pizza, moaned with pleasure, and said he'd get me to try his food one day. It was so creepy, Reagan actually apologized for it the week after it aired. That rat has starred in many of my nightmares. Still can't watch cooking shows because of him. Laylee's Funhouse was weird because it seemed out of place on a midnight block. It was a kids' show about these three bulbous mascots named Laylee, Lulay, and Lo. They bounced around and learned how to share or whatever. I was a bit too old for it, but it was nice background noise while I caught up on comics or doodled. Every episode, the mascots sat down and told the viewer how much they cared about them and how great a friend they were. For some reason, I always caught myself saying it back. Dumb show, but charming. Saving the best for last, my favorite show was Regal Radiant Retribution. The concept was this angelic robot superhero guy rescued kids in trouble by beating the crap out of demons. Think Bible Man, but replace the title character with the Doom Slayer and make the villains actual threats. Nostalgia could be coloring my perception, but the special effects were some of the best I've ever seen. Lots of massive puppets and intricate suits that looked so good I swore the monsters were real. For some reason, they didn't play it much. If I had to guess, it was probably because it was way too expensive to run it every week. The one weird thing about it was every episode would run with Regal talking to the viewers about how to protect themselves during spiritual warfare. Always pray before bed. Don't make deals with ghosts, even if they seem friendly. Use salt to deter spirits, etc. It wasn't bad advice, necessarily. Just seemed a bit esoteric for a kid's show. I still think about this one. Wish I could find it online. One of the best things about the block was there were never any commercials. Instead, Reagan would talk to the viewer between the shows. If Mr. Rogers was your lovable grandpa, Reagan was your cool aunt who'd let you watch R-rated movies and sneak you a sip of her beer. She told a lot of funny stories and occasionally read viewers' letters. I tried writing to her once, but I couldn't send it because for some reason they never showed a mailing address. I guess in hindsight, the letters could have been fake, but I like to believe they were not. I'd usually turn off the TV and go to bed when the White Room programming was over, but occasionally I'd stay up to see what happened in the Black Room. When the White Room shows ended, Reagan would say goodnight to the kids, watching, wait a moment, and snap her fingers. The color would then bleed out of her clothes and into the room, staining it in an unnaturally dark black. Reagan was dressed in white, would then introduce the night's programs. Even as a child, the symbolism was about as subtle as a brick to the face, but it was a cool effect. When Reagan was in the Black Room, her personality shifted. She was still playful, but a bit more bitter. She never crossed over into being a jerk, but she'd tease the viewer for watching such horrifying content and taunt people who were trying to record the block. I never figured out how to tape shows for later, so I'm not sure if it was actually possible to tape Crossing Hour or not. That said, her stories of television sets catching fire turned me off trying anything. I didn't watch The Black Room very often because most of the shows were too freaky for me. That said, I recall the ones I caught in my braver moments. Stolas Round Table was a recurring segment that played every couple of weeks. They'd usually show it first, so it was the Black Room show I caught the most. In it, a man wearing a suit, gloves, and an owl mask sat in the middle of a nicely decorated study and talked about current events, news stories, science, that kind of thing. He had a chair, but for some reason he was always sitting in the middle of a white circle. Usually he was alone, but sometimes he invited guests on. All of his guests also wore animal masks and sat in white circles. I thought his show was boring most of the time, but I liked what he did whenever a guest said something he didn't agree with. He'd always cut them off by saying the word drivel in a low voice. Stolas would let the silence sink in for a moment, then he'd continue on as if nothing had happened. Guests almost always kept their answers in a short yes or no after that. In retrospect, most of Stolas' guests seemed to be afraid of him. Pretty creepy setup for what ultimately amounted to a talk show. Cletus Cunningham's Chainboree was shot in what appeared to be a flooded basement. The titular Cletus was a disgusting old hick who wanted to teach the viewer how to make real moonshine. This one was hard to watch because it was recorded off a handheld camcorder. The guy filming was terrible at keeping the camera steady, so it was hard to make out what was happening. Something about a party and harvesting ingredients. I had to turn it off midway through because the camera work was so bad I started to get sick. That, and someone in the background started moaning for help. One nature special followed a camera which was being lowered into the ocean. The camera must have been pressurized somehow because it went deeper and deeper without cracking or having an issue with transmitting video. Eventually the camera got so deep there was no light at all. It was silent for a few minutes. Then something in the dark groaned. Weird sounds reverberated through the air, almost like chanting. Before I could figure out what it was saying, the camera jerked hard and the footage cut out. The rest of the program was a technical difficulties screen. There was one untitled show that started out in a dark room full of shiny threads. A soft voice in the darkness started talking, saying stuff about how kind it was of us to come into its home or whatever. The topic turned to tonight's dinner, and I realized something was slowly creeping towards the camera out of the darkness. The voice was so hypnotic. I didn't realize the thing was a giant spider until its face loomed out of the shadows. Multiple eyes glittered menacingly as the spider clicked its mandibles and reared back. I ripped off my headphones, dove for the remote, and turned off the show before the spider had a chance to do whatever it was planning to do to the cameraman. I was already an arachnophobe, but that show made it so much worse. The way those eyes glistened in the dark. A show that only aired once looked like home video footage of a guy walking through a house. The viewer never saw the guy's face, or got an explanation about why he was there. Halfway through the show, the cameraman started filming people sleeping in beds. The creepy thing was the cameraman didn't do anything to them or say anything. He just stood there for a bit and moved on. The show ended with the cameraman crept into the basement and zoomed in on someone watching a TV. The guy turned around and the show abruptly stopped. I couldn't get a good look at the guy's face, but he seemed scared. Even with the threat of potential nightmares hovering over my head, I couldn't stop watching Crossing Hour. Problem was, I couldn't talk to anyone about it. If I told my parents, they'd know I was staying up too late, and the kids at school thought I was making it up for attention. I felt bad about it at first, but then I decided to think about it like I'd been inducted into a secret club. It was a fun feeling, and it took my mind off recent events. And then one day, I stopped watching. All because of one specific show that really got to me. It started out as a pretty great night. Heckbusters had a David episode, and there'd been a particularly awesome episode of Raggle. He'd been forced to fight a whole gauntlet of monsters at the same time, and he still won. He even managed to decapitate the monster that had organized the whole thing. Seriously? Best show ever. After the credits ran, Reagan said goodnight and switched the show over to the black room. I was just about to turn it off when a little voice in the back of my head told me to stick around. I had just turned 9 the day before, and I guess that made me feel more grown up or something. So what if the black room had given me nightmares before? The white room had too. It was just weird TV. I could handle it. I settled in and watched the first program. Another episode of Stolas. Nothing special. After Stolas ended, a bumper played like usual, but instead of Reagan's normal introduction, the bumper faded in on an empty black room. Off screen, Reagan was arguing with someone. Whoever it was, he was getting chewed out. This was new. I'd never heard Reagan get angry before. After a few more seconds of arguing, someone pointed out they were on. Reagan stepped into view, fixed her outfit, and glared at the camera. She forced a smile, but I could tell she was still mad. Hey there, creeps. The next program is going to be even spookier than usual. Viewer discretion is advised. Reagan held the smile for a moment. Then her face fell. I know I say that every night, but I'm serious. Kids, if you're still here, turn off the TV. Now. Naturally, Reagan's pleading had the opposite effect. The black room was disturbing as a rule. If Reagan was begging viewers to switch off, something crazy was about to happen. Turning the TV off wasn't an option. I had to see this for myself. As for the rest of you sickos, let's start the show. But have your remotes ready just in case. And if it talks to you directly, don't. Reagan's face flickered out, replaced by static. After a few seconds, a title card appeared. Nothing fancy, just some white text on a black background. The name of the program was Invitation. The screen cut to a dimly lit room filled with candles and weird symbols. It was too dark to see exactly what the symbols were, but they were all made up of circles and complicated line work. The audio was bad too, like something recorded on an old home video camera. A hooded man walked into the room, cleared his throat, and spoke to the camera. Deep shadows made it impossible to see his face. Welcome. Tonight we are going to invite a being from beyond the grave into our earthly plane. Unlike the network's previous offerings, we will be seeing raw, uncontrolled evil on live television. I look forward to the results. The man drew a circle around himself, sat down, and began muttering. I tried to catch the words, but I couldn't understand what he was saying over the camera buzz. The man muttered for a few minutes, then raised his hands. Hark! If any being hears me, speak. Speak and be known. Nothing happened. I laughed. All that build-up for nothing. The man shouted again, trying to get a response. Still nothing. He stood, enraged. Spirits, I demand you listen to. The man screamed. I looked at his feet and noticed in his haste he'd stepped slightly out of the circle. Every inch of flesh outside the circle had been crushed flat. The man barely registered what had happened to him before his foot began moving further out of the circle. He tried to pull it back, but something was preventing him. He screamed in pain as whatever held him slowly dragged him out of safety. Seemingly prepared for this, the man pulled a knife out of his robes and prepared to sever his leg. Before he could swing the blade, the thing grabbing him yanked hard on his leg. The man yelped and fell to the ground, now more than halfway out of the circle. The knife had fallen out of his reach. The invisible creature resumed, slowly pulling the man out of his protective charm. "No, I'm sorry," the man screamed as he attempted to claw his way back to safety. "I spoke out of turn. I am a loyal servant. I am your beloved servant." By this point, the man was completely outside the protective boundary. His hood had fallen off, revealing several tattoos on his face. He looked scared. Whatever was in the room with him forced him to stand. He tried to run back to the circle, but the invisible creature pushed him away. I leaned into the TV, absorbed by what I was seeing. The man stood there. For a moment, nothing happened. Tears ran from his eyes as he looked around for any sign of his tormentor. I'll make a sacrifice. Anything you want. Just don't." That was when his body crumpled like a tin can. I recoiled back in shock. 1 second the guy was fine. The next his body was flattened in the middle. Blood trickled from his mouth as he gasped his last breath. I like to think he died before the pain hit. The corpse stood there for a few seconds before falling to the ground. After that, nothing. The body stayed on the floor. The thing in the room was silent. The camera buzz droned on and on. Eyes still glued to the TV, I reached for the remote. Whatever came next wasn't worth it. That was when the voice said, "Don't touch that." I froze. Nothing had happened on the show. Same dead guy, same vacant audio buzz. But I'd heard it crystal clear through the headphones. Whatever was in that room was talking. "Good. Hands in your lap now. I want to talk to you." I did as the voice told. It seemed like a bad idea, but I couldn't help being curious about what it had to say. Listen to me carefully. This man was a very bad person. He did many terrible things. He deserved to die. Do you understand? I couldn't help nodding. To this day, I'm not sure if it was because I agreed, or because I was too scared to argue. Good. With that out of the way, hello, my newly devoted followers. So lovely to meet all of you. A light static haze covered the screen. If I squinted, the static just barely made a shape in the middle of the room. It was vaguely humanoid, but something about it wasn't right. The arms would be too long, then they'd fix themselves, but the head had horns. Then the horns would disappear, but it would have too many legs, and so on. Devoted. You've tuned in tonight because you wanted to see evil. Here I am. Am I what you hoped for? There was a pause. The voice laughed, and the fuzzy shape paced the room. I noticed it steered clear of what remained of the circle. Devoted. Can I be honest with you? I'm thrilled. I've never been able to talk to so many of you at once before. I don't know what to say. Oh, I know. Would anyone like to make a deal? The shape briefly looked at the camera, then continued to pace the room. I was starting to feel let down. The guy getting killed was scary, but this part was dragging on too long. Oh, we've got our first one signed and dotted. Devoted, you're too kind to me. Anyone else? This continued for a while. The shape would pace the room, glance at the camera, say something about completing another deal, then start pacing again. As the program went on, the static shape grew clearer. It got to the point where I didn't have to squint to see it anymore. Devoted, you're all so wonderful. I could deal with you all day. I can't help noticing there are some viewers out there who haven't spoken up yet. Isn't there something you want? The comment got me thinking about home. The show was getting boring, so it wasn't long before I started daydreaming. It would be nice to go back, see all the friends I had to leave behind, hang out at all my favorite spots again. I could tell all my friends about Crossing Hour too. They'd believe me. We could all have a sleepover and watch it together. I could be the cool kid. The kid everybody liked. It's yours, David. All you have to do is ask. I jumped back to attention. The thing was still pacing the room. It had grown much clearer since I'd zoned out. It was easier to see the transformations as it changed shape. Spider legs, bat wings, eyes with too many pupils, misshapen hands, serpent-like tails, goat heads, and all sorts of other horrors flashed over the thing's frame in impossible lifelike detail. Just looking at it made me feel sick. You can have anything you want, Devoted. Just ask. Out loud, right now. There was an unnerving forcefulness to the thing's voice. I forced a chuckle and grabbed the remote again. Ask. I winced and ripped my headphones off. The voice was so loud my ears started ringing. I quickly turned off the TV. As the power cut out, I heard a roar of frustration bellow out of the headphones. I can't be sure, but I swear the shape glared at me right before the screen went black. I settled into bed and stared at the ceiling. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't get to sleep. I kept replaying the last part of the show in my mind. David and Devoted did sound kind of similar, but Devoted had an extra syllable. But if you said it fast enough, it all sort of ran together. And it was late. I was tired. But I heard David. I fell asleep before I could decide one way or the other. That night I had some of the worst nightmares of my life. Something was in my room and it wanted to hurt me, but I couldn't see it. It kept moving around so I couldn't get a good look at it, and it whispered things about what it would do to me and my parents just when I was starting to calm down. I woke up so many times I lost track of what was a dream and what was real. At one point I woke up to a woman sitting on my bed, but she shushed me before I could say anything. Just me, hun. Go back to sleep. In my sleep-numbered state, I reasoned she was either my mom or a dream. Neither one was a threat, so I shut my eyes and drifted off. The rest of the night was peaceful. The following nights, however, were plagued with similar nightmares. None of them were as vivid as the first nights, but they were just as terrifying. It got so bad I couldn't even watch the White Room shows anymore. Eventually fear became aversion, and aversion became habit. When my family moved out of the apartment and settled into our new house, there were no complaints when my folks said I couldn't keep the TV in my room anymore. All desire to watch Crossing Hour was gone. I didn't think about Crossing Hour again until a few years later. One day, bored in science class, I doodled Regal in my notebook margins. The doodle activated all the good memories from before invitation, and I decided as long as I stuck to the White Room, it couldn't hurt to check in on Reagan and see how the block was doing. That Saturday night at 11 o'clock, I snuck downstairs to the basement, plugged in the old 9-inch set, and flipped through every channel, hoping against hope that I'd stumble onto Crossing Hour again. I tried every channel twice. It wasn't playing on any of them. Every couple of weeks I tried again. No luck. Maybe it was a regional thing. Maybe it got cancelled. Maybe Reagan just got sick of it and shut it down. Whatever the reason, Crossing Hour was off the air. Which brings me to this post. A cooking show came on last night and it reminded me of that rat. Normally, I click the show off and try to forget. But this time got me thinking, has anyone else seen Crossing Hour? If you have, shoot me a message and we can chat about old times. Even better, let me know if you have tapes. I'd love to watch Regal again. Keep invitation to yourself, though. I don't care if it was a trick, or if it's not as scary as I remember, or if I was hearing things at the end. I never want to see it again. I am a third-year college student. I have been dating this girl for almost a year now. I met her for the first time when I was working on a college essay in between lectures while I was sitting on a bench in the college yard. There were multiple benches, with tables all around the yard, intended for students to use. The college was right next to a small forest of sorts, so I liked the breath of nature I got from there, unlike the city air. The sun was setting when I was doing the assignment. The lamps were turned on at that time. There were enough lamps to light up the whole outdoor area. I was very absorbed in doing this assignment of mine that I did not even notice the girl who sat right next to me, staring at me for some reason. When I looked at her, she smiled at me. I smiled back to her. The first day, we didn't really talk to each other. I was about to say something to her, but could not because of my shyness. So it was soon time for my lecture, so I left. After finishing the lecture at about 10 p.m., I was headed home. She was still sitting on the same bench. She did not have a phone, nor did she have a book or anything of the sort. She seemed to stare at random places. It seemed like she was observing everything that went on around her. I didn't pay much heed to her because I was in a hurry to get back home. On the next few days, I didn't see her at the college. This felt strange because if we were attending the same college, we would have ran into each other at least once in every few days, but we didn't. I thought that it was because she had a different major. One day at sunset, as I was with my college friends, I saw her by herself on a bench. I wanted to go up to her and say hi to her, so I did it. It took a lot of courage because I had little to no experience with talking to girls, but to my surprise, we hit it off really well. Despite my shyness and inexperience with talking to girls, she told me that her name was Stella. We shared a few hobbies and interests, like writing, for example. I asked Stella what her major was. She told me that she was doing bachelor's in business, so this meant that we had no classes in common. Days passed by and I started developing feelings for her, and she did me. I didn't know that she liked me too at the time, so one day I decided to confess to her, and did it. To my surprise, she confessed that she had feelings for me too. It was my first relationship. We went on coffee dates often and spent time with each other a lot. A few months passed that way, and then things began to change. Of course, because I was such a lover boy, I didn't notice it at first. I would get weird glances from my friends whenever they saw me with her. At some point, I even thought that my friends were just making fun of me. Whenever I asked them what was so funny, they'd just brush it off. My friends were not the only ones who acted strange. My girlfriend was acting that way as well. She was such a chatterbox before, but now she was acting like someone who could barely speak. I decided to confront this issue directly and ask her what was wrong. "Hey, what's up?" I asked her curiously. She didn't answer me and stayed silent for a while. I wondered if she didn't like something I did, and itched for an answer. After some attempts, she finally answered. "It's nothing," was what she said. But I didn't believe her because there was obviously something going on with her. She started distancing herself a bit from me. It got worse to the point where we had this talk where she apologized to me and made up with me. I was so glad that we made up. I met up with her regularly on the bench pretty much every day. On some nights, I don't see her on the benches. I see some sort of a black apparition that disappears as soon as I get close to it. It would slowly fade into the light. I would just write it off as me just seeing things. And then, one day, as I was about to go up to Stella, one of my friends stopped me in my tracks. "Dude, why do you always talk to yourself there? That's weird," my friend asked. I got chills down my spine the moment he said that, and then I turned to look at Stella. She was staring at me. wide-eyed. Her eyes were too wide to be considered human eyes. It looked like bulging bug eyes. But the minute I saw that, I turned around because I could not bear to look at the scary figure. I was absolutely speechless. So this was why my friends looked at me like I was a crazy person whenever I went to Stella. The whole time I was talking to myself, I felt both embarrassed and extremely scared. I could not focus in class because my mind was too busy thinking about Stella and what to do about the situation. After my classes ended, it was almost midnight. I stayed behind a bit to complete an assignment and soon finished it. As I started my way home, there she was, on one of the college benches. There was Stella, but in her true form, she was covered in wounds. While smiling broadly from ear to ear, she opened her mouth broadly as I approached close to her. With her razor-sharp teeth in full view under the light, but I hesitated to go there because she was there. "Come here, you moron," she said with an angry, raspy voice. It sent chills down my spine. Without wasting any second, I quickly ran the opposite direction and went upstairs, since the only exit was past Stella. After I got upstairs, I looked at the bench to see if she was still there. She was gone. I turned around after that, and there she was, right in front of me with the creepiest smile imaginable. I was too shocked to even move a single muscle in my body. I absolutely froze up. She did not waste any time and grabbed my neck. She was capable of such power that I don't think that even 3 full-grown men can take her on. She then began thrashing me about, and then I was thrown near a fire extinguisher. I quickly took it and got her off guard by throwing it at her. While she was distracted, I ran away as fast as I possibly could and exited the college building. I didn't even look back. I heard her raspy voice behind me, screaming and shouting. As soon as I got out of the college yard, however, for some reason the sound suddenly completely stopped. I went straight home, and I couldn't sleep at all that night. I've shared the story with a friend of mine who used to study at the same college. I described the girl to him, and he told me that I was lucky to have escaped her because most ended up disappearing. He told me that most of the guys who met her have disappeared and still never had been found. And upon further research, I found that she is a college-bound entity, so I am too afraid to go to college now, and haven't went to college ever since. That is the only thing I can do to be safe. I grew up in a fairly rural area of Virginia. As a kid, I had an obsession for dirt bikes. Watching motocross on TV, the X Games, reading Racer X magazines, it was all I thought about. So when my mom and dad bought me my first dirt bike one Christmas, I was ecstatic. From that moment, my days were consumed with riding that thing. As soon as I got home from school until sundown, you can bet I was in the woods riding. Right behind my parents' house was a huge expanse of woods. There was a trail that ran virtually the entire length of our neighborhood. It was a point-to-point trail, with a few turns, hills, and jumps. It would take about 15 minutes on my dirt bike to ride the length of the trail from end to end. There were no other trails, just this one long trail. When I got to the end, I would just turn around, go back the other way. I would ride back and forth for hours, every day. I ended up learning that trail like the back of my hand, where every tree root was, where every turn was, where every rut was. You get the picture. When I was 13, I started having this reoccurring dream. I would be riding my dirt bike along that familiar trail when suddenly there would be a new intersection, a brand new trail to go down. I would ride down it and come to a large clearing in the woods. In my dream, I had this feeling that when I got to the clearing, I was supposed to be looking for something, finding something there, but every time I got to the clearing, I would wake up. This reoccurring dream continued until I was 14. I left my house one afternoon, hopped on my dirt bike, and began another afternoon of riding back and forth on the trail. I rode around for an hour when it happened. I was heading up a small hill, mindlessly by this point, knowing everything to expect. Coming from the hill, I saw it, the intersection. I locked my rear brakes, causing the rear end to slide sideways slightly. I couldn't believe my eyes. Was this real? I sat there for several minutes, my bike's motor idling, staring down at the trail. 1,000 thoughts raced through my head. How was this possible? Was it always here? Looking down the trail, I couldn't see the end. It went straight for about 50 yards, but I couldn't make out what was at the end. It was as if I couldn't focus on it clear enough. It was just a straight trail. It matched exactly what was in my dream. I decided not to go down it, almost not believing it was really there. I told myself that if it was there again tomorrow, then I'll go down it. The next day came, and I again ventured out into the woods. I rode straight to the point where I saw the new trail, fully expecting it to be gone. But sure enough, there it was again. I made the turn at the intersection, and slowly began riding down the trail. I drove down the trail, staying in third gear, slow and steady. The trail was completely straight, and it only took me about a minute to reach it. The clearing. The exact clearing I always saw in my dreams. Dumbfounded, I stopped, put my kickstand down, turned off the motor, and got off my bike. I took off my helmet, looking around. What the? I whispered to myself. The clearing itself was a perfect circle, around 50 feet in diameter. It was surrounded by dense forest, minus the single trail leading to it. I couldn't make sense of this. I thought I was losing my mind. I walked around the circle, confused, contemplating what it all meant, and looking around for answers. I began to feel an eerie feeling, as if I was being watched, a feeling of dread and danger. I felt as if I was suddenly somewhere I was very much not supposed to be. Screw this, I said. I threw my helmet back on, not bothering to buckle it, and kick-started my dirt bike, bringing life back to the motor. I peeled back down the trail, shifting gears and hauling it back home. I rode for a few minutes when it hit me. Why was it taking so long to get back? It took less than a minute to reach the clearing, yet I've been riding down this trail for what I felt like was several minutes, and I hadn't met back up with my familiar trail. I started to panic, getting disoriented. I told myself, maybe I'm going the wrong way. I knew it didn't make sense, but I was willing to try anything to get out of there. I spun the bike around, and within about 10 seconds, I made it back to the clearing. I peeled around again, back down the trail. Again I rode and rode, never making it back to the intersection. I stopped, got off my bike feeling defeated, confused and scared. I threw my helmet and collapsed next to the tree, sobbing. On my knees, I let out a frustrated and terrified scream. I sat there, trying to think of what to do. I'm not sure how long I sat there for. It felt like hours. I could see the sun dropping in the sky, the woods getting dimmer. I started to feel like I was never going home. I closed my eyes and somehow, probably out of mental exhaustion, fell asleep with my back against a tree. I'm not sure how long I slept for. I woke up, immediately jumping to my feet, wildly looking around and quickly gathering my bearings. The sun was shining brightly, and I was back on the trail. My trail. My blessed, familiar trail. The intersection and the new trail was still there, but I was out. Quickly, I jumped on my bike, riding as fast as I could to get back home. I had no idea how long I was gone for, and thought my parents were probably worried sick. Exiting the woods by the house, I parked my bike and ran inside. "Hi, honey," my mom said. "I'm sorry. I don't know what happened. I lost track of time." I managed to get out. "Well, it's only been an hour. I'm surprised you're already back inside," my mom said. I stood there, mouth agape, staring at my mom. "You okay?" my mom asked, a look of concern growing on her face. I forced out an awkward smile. "I'm fine, just not feeling well." I went to my room, a million questions running through my mind. I spent the next few days confused, replaying every moment through my head. I wanted to just make sense of everything, to have some logical reason, but there just wasn't one. I devised a plan that, looking back, was incredibly stupid, but I couldn't live with not knowing what happened to me in those woods. My dad was a bit of a tool connoisseur. Any tool, hardware, rope, bungee cords, he was your guy. Among his collection, he had a giant spool of yellow polypropylene rope, around 600 feet of it. I decided I was going to use the rope, tie it to a tree at the intersection, and then ride back down the trail to investigate. The rope would serve as my lifeline, helping guide me back when I was ready to leave. That day, I went back out. Getting to the trail intersection, I tied one end of the rope around my waist and used several bungee cords to tie the spool to a tree, giving me slack but staying secured to the tree. I headed back down the trail. Feeling a new boost of confidence and determination, I rode back down the trail and quickly arrived back to the clearing. I kept one hand on the knot on my waist, being sure it stayed there. I got off my bike, leaving it idling, and walked into the middle of the circle. I started to get that eerie feeling again, as if being watched. I shook it off, a new feeling of bravery. I felt determined to discover what it was I was supposed to find, and what the point of all of this was. I forced down the feeling of dread, scanning the clearing. I suddenly became fixated on one tree in particular. This tree was darker than the rest, almost looking burned. I got closer to it. Flaky black scorch marks covered the tree. I was staring at the tree, almost feeling stuck in place, when suddenly, something began slowly peeking its head out from behind it. The face was black, burned, decayed, inhuman, like a bad imitation of a human. It had short, wiry black hair that looked oily and covered in soot. As soon as its eyes met mine, my dirt bike's motor shut off. The sudden silence caused me to turn around to look at my bike. Then I quickly turned back. The thing was gone. The woods were silent. For a split second I froze, until instinct in my body kicked in and told me to get out of there. I sprinted back to my bike, kick-started it harder than I ever had. I half expected it to not start, but to my relief, it actually started. I left my helmet behind, riding as fast as I could. The image of the thing's eyes burned in my mind, a shade of orange like fire. Looking into them had made me feel as if I was being sucked into an endless pit. In my haste to leave, I made a fatal mistake. Having walked a good ways past my bike into the clearing, I had created too much slack in the rope when heading back in the opposite direction. I was shifting gears, going faster, faster. Then suddenly the rope caught my chain. My rear wheel locked, and I was sent over the handlebars. Although in pain, I got to my feet as quickly as I could, dirty, limping, a burning pain in my ribs. The rope was still tied around my waist, but it had somehow been severed in the crash. Frantically, I looked around for the rest of the rope, the end that would lead me back, but it was gone. I ran back to my bike, trying desperately to get the pieces of rope out of my chain and sprocket, when I saw it. Movement from the corner of my eye. I stopped, froze, looking in the direction of the movement. I then saw more movement, again out of the corner of my eye. It was as if it was anticipating my moves, staying just out of eyesight, staring between the trees. I took off running down the trail, abandoning my bike. My adrenaline was pumping, and I knew I was running for my life. I then spotted the yellow rope, the beautiful yellow rope. Yes! I screamed, running as quickly as I could toward it, following it to salvation. But the rope began retracting, dragging on the ground back up the trail. No! I screamed, running as fast as I could towards it. I ran after it, as it seemed to run away from me. I was hoping to see the intersection, praying to see the intersection, and then I did. I reached it, crying, heaving, trying and failing to catch my breath. For a second, I felt pure relief for making it out alive. But I noticed something. The yellow rope. The spool was no longer bungeed to the tree. The rope now led to behind the tree. Slowly it stepped out from behind the tree, revealing itself in its entirety. It was the thing from the clearing. The woods were silent. A feeling of pure dread came over me. It had a look of pure malice in its gaze and a terrible smile as it continued to gather up the rest of the yellow rope. I was frozen in fear. I felt as if I was in ice water. I couldn't catch a breath, couldn't scream. I can only describe what I saw as a distorted imitation of a human. Black, charred, its form twisted and contorted into a grotesque mockery of life. Its eyes were pools of endless darkness, devoid of empathy and humanity, gleaming with an ancient predatory intelligence. It began to move toward me slowly. Its steps were silent, as if the ground itself recoiled from the touch of its feet. The air around me grew cold and carried the stench of decay. With each movement, its body shifted and rippled, as if it was struggling to contain its own shape. Its presence filled me with overwhelming dread, a primal fear that seized my entire being. Its voice was a twisted mixture of a whisper and a scream. I felt as if its gaze seeped into my mind, into my very being, turning my thoughts into twisted and nightmarish desires. As it approached closer and stood over me, I knew I was going to die. Everything went black. I woke up back on my familiar trail. The intersection was gone. The rope was gone. No trace of anything was left. In shock and in pain, I walked back home. In the end, I told my parents I had crashed my dirt bike and wasn't strong enough to push it back home. My dad went back into the woods to look for it, but never found it. I didn't care. I was never going to touch another dirt bike for the rest of my life. Since then, everything felt different. I felt like something was missing in me, as if that thing took something from me. I felt unable to enjoy anything, unable to have relationships, unable to care. I couldn't sleep. I didn't feel tired. I couldn't feel anything. I didn't know what to do. I just felt like a shell. That Christmas, my family and I were getting ready to leave for a Christmas tree farm, an annual tradition that used to bring me excitement. My parents were trying their best. They saw the change in me. Everyone did. Putting on brave faces, my parents asked me if I was excited to pick out our tree. I wasn't excited. I couldn't be excited about anything anymore. Sure, I said. trying my best to sound convincing. Before we left, my dad was digging in the garage looking for something. "Hey bud, have you seen my yellow rope?" The question sent me into a flashback of full terror, leaving me screaming, sobbing, and begging for help, begging for it to stop. From then on, I spent years in and out of therapy and institutions. I'm an adult now, but I've never shaken the feeling of pure emptiness. I decided I'm going to go back to my childhood home, back to that familiar trail that I can still remember like the back of my hand. If the intersection is there, I am going to go down it. I'm going to kill that thing and get back the piece of myself it took. If it kills me, taking the rest of me, so be it. Either way, I'm going to be free of this. I woke up yesterday feeling odd and itchy. My skin was so itchy I laid in bed for 30 minutes violently scratching until I bled. I rushed to the bathroom to look at my skin, and I was almost bluish all over. I hopped in the shower, and it provided some relief. I thought maybe I had a rash or something, but I was itchy everywhere. Maybe I had spread it while scratching. I don't know, but I hopped out of the shower and got dressed and went to the store to get some ointment. I got multiple different kinds of lotions and practically lathered myself in it. I started looking up my conditions, and I figured it was dry skin or eczema or something. It also mentioned bug bites, which sort of makes sense because I have been spending a lot of time outside lately. Then I remembered the bug bite on my ankle. My girlfriend, who was away visiting family, and I have been picking random cemeteries around town and driving to them. The cemeteries are kind of just a direction for us to drive, and we try to find fun places along the way. Thrift stores, dive bars, trails, and any other thing that catches our eye. We made it to the cemetery the other day in rural Kansas. This cemetery looked abandoned. Okay, maybe not the best way to describe it, but it was not well kept at all. The grass was overgrown, about as high as my waist in some places, and all the tombstones were dirty and weathered. We walked around looking at each grave, and they were all from the early to mid-1900s. We found one grave that was well kept, which I thought was sweet. While walking around, I got a painful bite on my ankle that made my knees buckle for a second. I figured it was a big mosquito, but before I got a chance to look at it, an old man with long greasy hair came running from the other side of the graveyard yelling, "Get off the grass, you idiots!" He spooked us, and we both just ran laughing. I had completely forgotten about the bite until now. I lifted my ankle to look at it, and I saw two very big bug bites with a bit of pus oozing out of them, which I thought was weird because I only remember feeling the one bite, but since that bite hurt so bad, I am starting to think that this is the root of my itching. What kind of bug could do this? I looked it up and it said it could be an allergic reaction. It says it can be life-threatening, but you know how it is when you look up your symptoms. Hey Google, I have a headache. Oh, that's unfortunate. You do indeed have a brain tumor. So I kind of shook it off, and hopefully it was mild besides the only condition I had was the itching. I didn't have red or swollen skin, or a rash, or anything, so I was hoping for the best. I stayed at home all day, moving as little as possible. It was almost bearable if I stayed completely still. I continued to scratch though, mostly gently but sometimes violently, making myself bleed a couple times. Even my face was itchy, especially near my mouth. I zoned out and scratched the same spot at the corner of my mouth for I think an hour before I felt a sharp pain. I went to the mirror, and the corner of my mouth was bleeding profusely. blood pouring out of my mouth. I tried to stop the bleeding, but the blood just soaked through the towel. I got in the shower again, and the water burned my mouth, but I just let the blood drip out into the tub. I stared at the shower floor for far too long as the steady stream of blood faded into the drain. I got out and went back to the mirror, and I was horrified. The corner of my mouth was ripped open into my cheek. I scratched so hard that I gashed my mouth open. I was disturbed. I was hurting. I was itchy and truly losing my mind at this point. I was in so much pain I knew I needed to go to the hospital, but I didn't have the energy or the insurance to do so. I told myself to sleep, and that I would go tomorrow. I took some of my girlfriend's sleeping meds and collapsed into bed. I think I fell asleep almost immediately. I was drained. Today I woke up, and I wish I hadn't. My skin was no longer itchy. I was beyond relieved. I laid there in absolute comfort, rubbing my skin gently. I put my hand to my mouth to see how my cut was doing, only to find no cut in my skin. I frantically felt all over my face, checking both sides of my mouth. I felt nothing. I sat up in my bed, and when I did, my foot touched something at the end of the bed. It almost felt like a grocery bag. I flipped over the blanket and saw a huge pile of something. It almost looked like the skin of an onion. I was confused, quickly trying to think of what it could be. I felt my heart racing as I slowly leaned closer and closer, until my eyes widened and I lunged backwards, tumbling off the bed. I think it's a pile of skin. Human skin. My skin. I'm scared and I don't know what to do. If anyone has any insight or ideas, that would be much appreciated.